The scene burns itself into historical memory like acid etching steel. Captured German field marshals descending from transport vehicles, their polished boots meeting the red clay soil of an American detention facility in Oklahoma. Their weathered faces, marked by years commanding divisions across North Africa and Italy, showed no fear, only contempt. Several actually smirked. American agriculturalists, simple folk working plows and grain silos. How could such people possibly have defeated the Afrika Korps, the elite mechanized force of the Wehrmacht? That arrogance hung thick in the humid Oklahoma air of 1944. In their minds, victory had only been delayed, not lost. Americans cannot fight, one field marshal whispered in German, his lips curling into a smirk. They can only plant wheat and tend cattle. Around him, officers shared in the laughter, their voices echoing across barbed wire fences under the blazing prairie sun. It was the laughter of men convinced they had fallen into the hands of a people too soft, too agricultural, too rural to ever be true conquerors. But what they did not yet understand was that those very wheat fields they mocked had become the silent arsenal of the United States. Behind every combine harvester stood an army of machines. Behind every acre, a network of logistics that stretched across an entire continent. Behind every grain silo, a nation whose power grew not from ideology, but from abundance. In Oklahoma alone, millions of acres of wheat stretched beyond the horizon, feeding not just towns, but entire armies across two oceans. In Kansas, corn poured into elevators so vast they resembled cathedrals of grain. The sheer scale defied European imagination. Yet these field marshals who had commanded panzer divisions across desert and mountain could not comprehend what lay before their eyes. As evening approached, the German officers were led to wooden barracks. They expected the grim silence of hunger, the meager rations that prisoners in North Africa had endured under their own command. Instead, they caught the aroma of bread baking in nearby kitchens, a scent so rich it unsettled them. Prisoners of war had prepared themselves for starvation. Yet something unprecedented was happening in this red dirt compound. That night, an American officer recorded the astonishment he witnessed in their eyes. He wrote in his report, "They expected chains and cold. What they saw instead were grain fields without end, and the promise that no prisoner would go hungry under the American flag." The contradiction was unbearable for men who had stood beside Rommel in the desert campaigns and believed in a Reich that would last 1,000 years. Dawn broke across the Oklahoma prairie as the rumble of engines drew near. The German field marshals rose from their bunks, expecting perhaps a small convoy, a handful of guards carrying supplies. Instead, they stared through the wire at a procession that defied belief. Massive grain trucks laden with wheat sacks, milk tankers gleaming in the morning sun, and refrigerated vehicles carrying sides of beef rolled steadily from the surrounding American farmland. The convoy stretched so far down the dusty road that heat waves rose like smoke, blurring the distant horizon. For men raised in North Africa scarcity, watching supplies ration drop by drop across desert campaigns, this spectacle transcended imagination. In the Afrika Korps, rations had been cut to subsistence levels by 1943, bread made with sand filler, water more precious than ammunition. Yet here, in the land they had ridiculed, food arrived in such quantity that even the prisoners' cynicism faltered. One field marshal muttered under his breath in German, "Das kann nicht real sein." This cannot be real. This is impossible. Another pressed his weathered face against the wire, eyes fixed on the overflowing cargo that seemed to mock everything they understood about wartime logistics. The scale of American agricultural machinery had shocked even their own intelligence reports. By 1944, the United States produced more than 30 million tons of wheat and over 90 billion pounds of milk in a single year. While German Afrika Korps veterans endured memories of hunger in Tunisian caves, American grain silos overflowed like concrete mountains across the Great Plains. Field Marshal Heinrich Kreutzer, who had commanded the 15th Panzer Division at El Alamein, watched truck after truck lumber past the fence line. His diary, later recovered after liberation, contained a terse entry. Today we witnessed grain convoys that would have supplied Rommel's entire army for months. I have not seen such abundance since before the desert campaigns began. That entry marked the beginning of a slow erosion of certainty. Word spread quickly through the barracks as officers whispered among themselves, voices low and disbelieving. Some claimed the Americans staged this display to break their morale. Others, staring at the endless flow of agricultural wealth, recognized there was no deception possible at this scale. For the first time, many began to grasp the true scope of the industrial capacity they had dismissed as farmer weakness. This was not peasant agriculture. This was mechanized food production on a level that made German efforts appear primitive by comparison. The first ladle of beef stew was poured into a dented tin cup and placed before Field Marshal Heinrich Kreutzer, whose name had once carried weight in Berlin and terror across North African battlefields. He stared at the steaming broth as though it were a weapon. Rich aromas rose from the thick liquid, fragrant with vegetables and meat that seemed impossible after months of desert rations and capture. Around him, fellow Afrika Korps officers received thick slices of white bread, their crusts golden brown, interiors so soft they seemed to float in calloused hands. For men hardened by campaigns from Tunisia to Sicily, the sight of food so abundant, offered by those they had despised, struck deeper than any artillery barrage they had survived. The American cooks were not soldiers of prestige, but farmers' sons from Oklahoma wheat country, drafted into service kitchens. Their hands, calloused from years working combines and grain elevators, now stirred massive steel pots that could feed 1,000 men in one sitting. "Eat up, boys," one drawled in a Plains accent as he ladled portions into tin cups, making no distinction between friend or enemy. There was no ceremony, no lecture, just the quiet efficiency of a people so abundant they could afford generosity even toward those who had sought to destroy them. The irony burned like acid in German throats. Only weeks before, Afrika Korps propaganda had portrayed Americans as weak, incapable of sustaining prolonged conflict in harsh conditions. Yet here, in the Oklahoma detention facility, field marshals found themselves nourished by the very agricultural workers they had mocked during desert campaigns. Some refused at first, pushing portions aside in wounded pride. But hunger, the same enemy that had plagued them in North African caves, soon gnawed through arrogance. One by one, they bent their heads and ate. A letter later confiscated from Major Ernst Hoffmann revealed humiliation he could not voice aloud. The bread was white as desert sand, but soft as silk. I had not tasted such bread since my childhood in Bavaria. Our soldiers bled in Tunisia for crusts of black bread mixed with sawdust. Yet here the enemy's farmers hand us food as though grain grows endlessly from Oklahoma soil. His words carried not only bitterness, but genuine astonishment. The first crack in an ideology built on contempt for American agricultural capability was spreading through the barracks like fractures in sun-baked clay. The German field marshals' bodies rebelled against the sudden abundance. Rich gravies caused nausea in stomachs accustomed to watery broths and sand-gritty water from North African campaigns. Butter-laden vegetables triggered digestive distress after months of fat-free desert rations. The sweetness of Oklahoma honey overwhelmed palates that had forgotten sugar existed beyond memory. Many could finish only portions of their meals, their digestive systems rejecting abundance after adapting to the brutal scarcity of Tunisian caves and Sicilian retreats. Field Marshal Kreutzer sat hunched over his plate, forcing down spoonfuls of beef stew while his stomach cramped in protest against nutrition it had been denied since El Alamein. American medical staff monitored these feeding sessions with clinical precision, documenting the physiological transformation of men who had commanded panzer divisions while slowly starving. Weight gain averaged 3 pounds per week during the first month of captivity at the Oklahoma facility. Scurvy symptoms disappeared within days as vitamin C coursed through systems depleted by months without fresh vegetables. Night blindness, endemic among Africa Corps veterans who had survived on hardtack and tinned meat, resolved rapidly as vitamin A deficiency was corrected through fresh dairy products and yellow vegetables that had vanished from German supply lines years earlier. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the camp's chief medical officer, recorded conditions that resembled concentration camp victims more than enemy military personnel. These officers arrived in states of systematic malnutrition despite their rank, she noted in her report. Bleeding gums, protein edema, mineral deficiencies we associate with famine conditions, not military service under the Wehrmacht. We immediately implemented graduated feeding protocols to prevent refeeding syndrome while their bodies readjusted to adequate nutrition. The medical examinations revealed the extent of their physical collapse. Average weight was 30 pounds below peacetime levels. Dental problems from vitamin deficiencies. Muscle wasting despite their status as high-ranking officers who theoretically received better rations than enlisted men. Yet the most disturbing discovery for the German prisoners was not their own condition, but the casual abundance surrounding them. American guards consumed meals that would have sustained Africa Corps headquarters staff for days, then discarded half-eaten portions without thought. The second day brought breakfast that continued their education in American agricultural might. The mess hall opened at 0630 hours with military precision, but the abundance remained staggering. Scrambled eggs prepared with real butter sat alongside bacon that sizzled with fat content impossible to obtain during Africa Corps campaigns. Fresh orange juice squeezed from Florida citrus provided vitamin C that had vanished from German field rations when Mediterranean supply routes were severed. Pancakes appeared in stacks on Oklahoma-made ceramic plates, each one larger than the daily bread ration German civilians received when fortunate enough to find any. Maple syrup from Vermont flowed freely, a luxury product that demonstrated America's capacity to allocate agricultural resources to pleasure rather than mere survival. The syrup alone represented sugar consumption that exceeded monthly German civilian allowances under wartime rationing. Coffee service continued the psychological assault on Wehrmacht assumptions. Real coffee beans roasted and ground fresh daily in the camp kitchens produced beverages that reminded field marshals of peacetime officers' clubs in Berlin. American guards consumed this coffee throughout their shifts, treating as routine what had become Germany's most coveted black market commodity during the desert campaigns. The casual waste shocked German observers who had learned to preserve every grain of precious resources. Americans discarded food that showed slight imperfection or remained partially consumed. They treated abundance with the carelessness of people who had never experienced genuine scarcity, revealing resource security that German society had never achieved even before the war began. But it was the American women serving the meals who delivered perhaps the most devastating blow to Nazi ideology about female capabilities. These were not the weak, pampered creatures that Wehrmacht propaganda had depicted. They were competent professionals who managed complex food service operations while maintaining military discipline and efficiency that impressed even critical German observers. Sergeant Mary O'Sullivan from an Oklahoma farming family supervised meal preparation with organizational skills that exceeded what many Africa Corps staff officers had achieved in logistics management. She coordinated supply chains spanning multiple states, maintained quality standards that treated prisoner meals as worthy of professional attention, and operated industrial kitchen equipment with expertise that challenged assumptions about American capabilities. What should have been routine administrative paperwork became a moment of psychological demolition. The Red Cross documentation revealed statistics that shattered every assumption the Africa Corps veterans held about American agricultural capacity and resource management during total war. Over 425,000 German prisoners across American detention facilities were receiving 3,200 calories daily without shortages, without rationing, without the hunger that had plagued their own forces since the retreat from El Alamein. The contrast was staggering. In Berlin, families survived on less than half that nutrition. In Munich, children lined up for hours to receive thin slices of ersatz bread mixed with sawdust and hope. Field Marshal Heinrich Kreutzer, studying the Red Cross reports through wire-rimmed glasses salvaged from his Afrika Korps headquarters, calculated impossible mathematics. The bread alone provided to this Oklahoma facility exceeded what entire Wehrmacht divisions received monthly during the Tunisia campaign. The meat portion surpassed what German officers consumed in peacetime Berlin restaurants. Lieutenant Colonel Hans Weber, former logistics coordinator for Rommel supply lines, possessed intimate knowledge of German resource limitations through 3 years of desperate improvisation across North African battlefields. He had spent months requisitioning fuel that never arrived, requesting ammunition that didn't exist, pleading for medical supplies consumed by higher priority units fighting losing battles. Now Weber documented American abundance with methodical precision that revealed the true scope of industrial capacity. This single Oklahoma detention facility consumes more beef weekly than the entire Afrika Korps received monthly during our final offensive. The dairy products alone represent production levels that exceeded German peacetime capacity across multiple provinces. American kitchen records, made available through Geneva Convention transparency requirements, documented daily food deliveries that defied European comprehension. 3,000 pounds of meat arrived weekly from Kansas ranches, 800 gallons of milk were consumed daily from Oklahoma dairies. Fresh produce arrived by refrigerated railcar from farms operating without fear of bombing raids or military requisition. The supply chains supporting this abundance stretched across an entire continent, coordinating production from dozens of states to ensure enemy prisoners received nutrition superior to German civilians. Each delivery truck represented logistical coordination that surpassed Wehrmacht capabilities at their peak efficiency during the early desert victories. The personal humiliation deepened with each passing day as the Afrika Korps field marshals confronted an unbearable truth. Their survival depended entirely on the generosity of the very Oklahoma agricultural workers they had dismissed as inferior during their desert campaigns. Every spoonful of soup became a lesson in dependence. Every slice of bread carried the bitter taste of misjudgment. Field Marshal Kreutzer sat on a wooden bench one evening with his fellow officers, the Oklahoma sunset painting the detention facility in shades of red that reminded him of Saharan dawns. The conversation was subdued, weighted with admissions none wanted to voice aloud. Finally, he spoke in barely audible German. We laughed at the American farmer during our advance toward Alexandria. We said they were soft, unfit for desert warfare, incapable of sustaining logistics across such distances. But they have kept us alive longer than our own supply lines managed in Tunisia. Without their wheat and beef, many here would have perished from the malnutrition we brought from our own campaigns. His words hung in the humid Oklahoma air, like a confession extracted under interrogation. It was an acknowledgement not to captors, but to comrades who shared the same shameful realization. The enemy, they had mock-possessed resources that dwarfed German capabilities even during peacetime prosperity. Lieutenant Colonel Weber, who had calculated supply requirements for panzer divisions across North Africa, began documenting the economic implications in his hidden diary. Each meal represents agricultural output that could sustain an entire Wehrmacht regiment for days. The butter consumption alone equals what we allocated monthly for field hospitals treating wounded from desert battles. Yet they provide this abundance to prisoners without apparent strain on supply systems supporting global warfare. His calculations revealed uncomfortable truths about relative industrial strength. If America could maintain such consumption levels while simultaneously supporting military operations across multiple theaters, while shipping supplies to British and Soviet allies, while maintaining civilian morale through adequate rationing, then German intelligence assessments have been catastrophically flawed from the beginning. The American guards themselves confirmed this reality through casual conversations that revealed expectations born of lifelong abundance. They complained about minor variations in meal preparation that would have seemed miraculous to Afrika Korps veterans. They expressed preferences between different menu options, discussing food with familiarity that treated routine abundance as normal rather than extraordinary. The waste disposal systems revealed American attitudes toward abundance that struck the Afrika Korps veterans like physical blows. Each evening, kitchen staff scraped barely touched portions into garbage containers without concern or hesitation. Entire bread rolls with single bites missing disappeared into waste bins. Thick steaks cut, but not finished joined vegetables left untouched because prisoners' stomachs, conditioned by months of desert scarcity, could not process such rich fare. Field Marshal Kreutzer watched through the mess hall windows as American personnel treated this waste as inevitable rather than tragic. Food that would have sustained his panzer crews during the siege of Tobruk vanished into disposal systems designed to handle abundance rather than preserve every scrap of nutrition. Oklahoma kitchen staff, primarily farmers' daughters working wartime service jobs, managed this waste stream with mechanical efficiency that revealed a relationship with scarcity unknown to German minds. Industrial garbage disposals ground food remnants into pulp. Composting systems converted organic waste into agricultural fertilizer for the surrounding wheat fields. Even disposal processes demonstrated efficiency that extracted value from materials Wehrmacht logistics would have preserved desperately. One evening, Private Dorothy Washington from an Oklahoma farming family unwrapped her personal lunch near the fence line where German officers could observe. 2 sandwiches stacked thick with roast beef, a slice of apple pie still warm from base ovens, and a thermos of fresh milk from local dairies. She ate casually while reading letters from home, then discarded half the pie because it had cooled slightly. Lieutenant Colonel Weber, watching this display of casual waste, whispered to his bunkmate in disbelief. That guard consumes better food during a single work break than we provided our staff officers during the entire retreat from El Alamein. She throws away dessert that would have fed a Wehrmacht squad for days during our supply shortages in Tunisia. The psychological impact accumulated through daily repetition of waste that challenged fundamental assumptions about wartime resource management. American abundance was not carefully managed scarcity stretched to maximum efficiency. It was genuine surplus that allowed casual disposal of food German forces would have fought over during desert campaigns. Weber began documenting these observations with the methodical precision of a logistics officer analyzing supply capabilities. The waste alone from this facility exceeds the total food allocation for German detention facilities housing enemy prisoners across the entire Reich. The mathematics became inescapable as the Afrika Korps veterans began calculating production requirements that sustained such overwhelming abundance during global warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Weber, whose expertise in logistics had kept panzer divisions mobile across North African deserts, applied his analytical skills to understanding American agricultural capacity. His calculations, recorded in margins of Red Cross documents and scraps of paper, revealed industrial coordination that dwarfed German achievements even during peacetime prosperity. The daily milk consumption at this single Oklahoma facility requires dairy herds larger than entire provinces maintained in Bavaria before the war began. The beef portions demand cattle ranching operations exceeding what the Reich managed across occupied territories from France to the Ukraine. Field Marshal Kreutzer, studying Weber's figures through wire-rimmed glasses, recognized implications that shattered every assumption about American industrial weakness. If one detention facility consumes agricultural output equivalent to feeding 3 Wehrmacht divisions, and America operates hundreds of such facilities while simultaneously supplying British forces, Soviet allies, and their own global military operations, then our intelligence estimates were catastrophically inadequate. The wheat consumption alone defied European comprehension. Oklahoma grain elevators visible beyond the facility fences towered like concrete monuments to abundance. Each structure containing more grain than Germany had harvested in entire provinces during their best peacetime years. American agricultural machinery, glimpsed through fence openings, included combine harvesters larger than Wehrmacht tanks, capable of processing grain fields measured in square miles rather than acres. Weber's most disturbing calculation involved ammunition production mathematics applied to agricultural output. American farmers, aided by mechanization that exceeded German industrial capacity, could feed more than 20 people per agricultural worker. In Germany, even before wartime disruptions, agricultural efficiency barely sustained 8 people per farmer during optimal conditions. The fuel consumption supporting this abundance revealed petroleum resources that made German shortages appear deliberately imposed rather than naturally occurring. Each grain truck burning gasoline to transport wheat from Oklahoma fields consumed more fuel daily than Wehrmacht units received weekly during desert campaigns, when every gallon was measured against tactical requirements. Major Ernst Hoffmann, captured during the Sicily evacuation, documented personal observations that captured the psychological impact. Their farm tractors consumed petroleum, like our panzers consumed diesel during full offensive operations. Yet they used this fuel to plant crops that feed enemy prisoners, while their own people maintained civilian comfort levels we never achieved during peacetime. The psychological transformation from arrogance to bitter acknowledgement accelerated through autumn as diary entries and intercepted letters revealed the complete collapse of ideological certainty among the Afrika Korps veterans. Field Marshal Kreuzer's private writings, discovered during routine inspections, documented internal struggles that no amount of military discipline could suppress. September 15, 1944. The bread today was white as North African sand, but infinitely more precious. Our men died at Kasserine Pass, fighting for supply lines that never delivered what these Oklahoma farmers provide to enemy prisoners without apparent effort. I think of my wife still in Dresden, where such abundance exists only in childhood memories before this war consumed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Weber's correspondence, intercepted before reaching his family in Munich, contained admissions that would have seemed treasonous months earlier. We mocked American agricultural workers as simple peasants incapable of sustaining modern warfare. Yet they feed us better than our own government-managed during peacetime prosperity. Each meal carries the bitter taste of recognition that we fundamentally misunderstood our enemy's capabilities. Major Hoffmann wrote with clinical precision about observations that challenged every assumption drilled into Wehrmacht officers during years of indoctrination. The guards consume coffee throughout their shifts, real coffee from beans rather than acorn substitutes we learned to accept. They discard cigarettes half-smoked, demonstrating casual relationship with resources that became impossible luxuries during our desert campaigns. The evening conversations in barracks shifted from defiant analysis of tactical errors to quiet acknowledgement of strategic blindness. Officers who had commanded divisions across Sicily and Tunisia found themselves questioning fundamental beliefs about American weakness that had sustained German confidence since the declaration of war. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the camp's medical officer, observed psychological changes that accompanied physical recovery from malnutrition. The initial anger and resentment typical among prisoners has given way to something more complex. These men are processing the realization that their survival depends entirely on the generosity of people they were trained to despise. One evening, Field Marshal Kreuzer sat alone on his bunk, staring at a photograph of his family hidden in his uniform jacket. He whispered into the Oklahoma darkness words that would have been unthinkable during the advance toward Alexandria. Perhaps we were the ones who never understood what real strength looked like. Perhaps the farmer's plow was always mightier than the panzer's gun. Winter descended upon the Oklahoma plains with bitter winds that rattled the detention facility's wooden structures, yet the abundance continued without interruption. Fresh vegetables arrived daily from heated greenhouses across the American heartland. Dairy trucks navigated icy roads to deliver milk and cream that had become mythical luxuries during German wartime rationing. The seasonal cold that would have meant starvation across war-torn Europe became merely another demonstration of American logistical superiority. Field Marshal Croiser stood at the barracks window, watching snow accumulate on grain elevators that continued operations despite freezing temperatures. Steam rose from heated silos where mechanical systems maintained optimal storage conditions for wheat reserves that dwarfed anything Germany had stockpiled during peacetime abundance. The infrastructure supporting this agricultural empire operated with precision that exceeded Wehrmacht efficiency at its peak. Lieutenant Colonel Weber documented winter operations with the methodical fascination of a logistics officer witnessing capabilities beyond theoretical possibility. Their heated storage facilities consume more fuel daily than entire Afrika Korps supply columns received during desert campaigns. Yet they maintain these operations to preserve grain quality for prisoners, while their own cities presumably require similar heating for civilian comfort. The psychological demolition reached completion during December when American agricultural statistics for 1944 were shared through Red Cross documentation. Oklahoma alone had produced enough wheat to feed the entire German civilian population for 6 months. Kansas cattle ranches supplied beef sufficient for Wehrmacht requirements across all occupied territories. Individual American states generated agricultural surpluses that exceeded total German production during their most successful harvests. Major Hoffman, studying these figures by lamplight in the barracks, wrote his final analysis of American capabilities. "We entered this war believing industrial capacity determined victory. We calculated steel production, aircraft manufacturing, petroleum reserves. We never considered that the ability to feed armies might prove more decisive than the ability to arm them. American farmers achieved what our generals attempted through conquest, the ability to sustain unlimited operations across unlimited distance for unlimited duration. The casual conversations among guards during winter duties provided final confirmation of resource security beyond German comprehension. They complained about overtime pay for snow removal. They discussed vacation plans to Florida citrus groves. They treated global warfare as temporary inconvenience rather than existential struggle, revealing confidence rooted in abundance that German society had never achieved even during the prosperous years before military expansion began. Liberation came with spring winds across the Oklahoma prairie, carrying the scent of wheat fields preparing for another harvest that would dwarf European agricultural achievements. The Afrika Korps field marshals walked through detention facility gates they had entered with arrogant laughter, now departing in humbled silence that spoke louder than any victory speech could have managed. Field Marshal Heinrich Croiser paused at the threshold, turning back toward grain elevators that had become symbols of American abundance beyond his comprehension during months of captivity. The red clay soil beneath his polished boots held memories of assumptions shattered by the simple act of being fed by those he had mocked during desert campaigns from Tunisia to Sicily. The repatriation ships that carried them across the Atlantic were themselves products of American industrial capacity they had failed to understand. Liberty vessels built faster than German intelligence believed possible, loaded with supplies for European reconstruction that demonstrated continued abundance despite global warfare demands. Even defeat was cushioned by enemy generosity that challenged every assumption about democratic weakness. Lieutenant Colonel Weber carried documents back to a shattered Reich, carefully preserved calculations that revealed the true scope of American agricultural superiority. His final report, submitted to Oberkommando der Wehrmacht before its dissolution, contained admissions that would have seemed impossible during the confident advance toward Alexandria years earlier. We entered captivity expecting harsh treatment from farmers we dismissed as inferior to German military tradition. Instead, we discovered agricultural capacity that rendered our entire strategic assessment meaningless. American wheat production alone exceeded combined Axis food resources. Their casual abundance during total war revealed industrial strength we never possessed during peacetime prosperity. The psychological impact accompanied them back to bombed German cities where rationing continued long after surrender. Major Ernst Hoffmann, walking through rubbled Munich streets, carried memories of Oklahoma abundance that made current deprivations seem deliberately chosen rather than naturally imposed. The contrast between American generosity toward enemies and German inability to feed their own civilians during peacetime recovery became daily torture. In quiet moments, usually during meals of thin soup and ersatz bread, the former Afrika Korps officers shared memories of captivity that haunted them more than battlefield defeats. They had been conquered not by superior tactics or braver soldiers, but by agricultural abundance, so overwhelming that military resistance became meaningless. The laughter that had echoed across Oklahoma detention facilities during their arrival had died completely. In its place remained silence, heavy with recognition that the farmers they had mocked possessed power more enduring than any Panzer division could achieve.